and in terms of their physical health. Okay? I first got interested in this by having an experience that I didn't understand. I was working in Philadelphia at the time, and I was conducting post-traumatic stress disorder evaluations for refugees who were seeking asylum in the United States. And I spent my days hearing their stories of trauma, right? And these were very, very significant stories of trauma. I noticed I started waking up with nightmares, right? I started having trouble sleeping. And what I realized is that I was living this experience that people called secondary trauma. So I was curious about that. How does that happen, and what do we do? So at its most extreme, this can look almost like post-traumatic stress, right? People can have flashbacks, nightmares, trouble sleeping, depression, anxiety. Sometimes it's more subtle than that. It can look like sleep disturbances, kind of getting irritable, right? Maybe not feeling like you're connecting with people as well as you used to. But what we know is that when we study the brains of people who help, the pathways in the brain, the way the brain cells are connected, start to change when you spend your days living with your own traumas and those of others. And if we don't take care of that, maybe you burn out and can't help anymore, right? Or maybe you pay a significant price in terms of your own physical health. So any questions about what we mean when we say secondary trauma? Okay, so let's talk about what we can do about this, okay? Because the goal is for each and every one of you to continue to be able to be sustained in the work that you do. The first thing, and this is why I thank Jess for covering this topic tonight, is that we have to be able to acknowledge it. Often people feel ashamed or embarrassed. Who am I to say that I'm struggling when the people I'm helping are struggling so much more, right? We almost feel like we should be superhuman. We should be able to suck it up and just be okay. So people don't talk about this. They suffer in silence, right? And so it starts to eat away and eat away and eat away until we can't ignore it anymore. And sometimes we're completely burned out, right? Or sometimes we only notice it when a doctor says you're really having health effects from this, and it's almost too late, right? So the first thing, we'd say a lot in psychology, name it to tame it. We have to be able to say out loud without shame or embarrassment when we're tired, right? When we're struggling, when we're experiencing things that we don't understand. And we have to say it to each other, right? We have to be able to create space for each other to acknowledge the struggle and acknowledge the fatigue if we're going to be able to do something about it. And we have to give ourselves permission to acknowledge that. The other piece is we have to look at how we're thinking about this phenomenon. If we look at it as a sign of weakness, I should be stronger, shouldn't be experiencing these things, I shouldn't be feeling this way, we're never going to do anything about it. So we have to acknowledge that it is just part of the territory, right? That as human beings, we're just as susceptible to this as any other person. Doesn't mean we're not a good helper, doesn't mean we're not here for the right reasons, but we are human and our brains change sometimes too. We then have to think about what self-care means for helpers. And we often use that phrase and it's kind of thrown around, we gotta do self-care, we gotta do self-care, without really knowing what that means. It has to mean something tangible, right? If you don't recognize that self-care is the only way that you're going to continue to be able to help, you're framing it incorrectly, right? So we have to get the narrative right. We have to be able to call self-care critical in order to actually follow through. There tend to be 3 buckets that self-care falls into if we're going to try to protect the brain, right? The first is physical activity. You don't have to go run a marathon, but we have to take care of our basic bodies, right? We have to move. We have to exercise, right? Whether that's walking, running, I don't care what it is, but we know that our brains are not healthy if our bodies are not healthy. They're fundamentally connected. We also know that connection matters. You are all here because you're part of a community, right? As human beings, we are hardwired to need each other, right? What we do, though, when we're struggling, is we withdraw, we shut down, right? We kind of go away from people. So what we want to do is when we notice that we're struggling, we need to connect even more. We need to fight that inner battle that's telling us shut down, withdraw, separate from others, and actually seek out ways of connecting. What that looks like to each of you may vary, right? But it does require being vulnerable and saying, I need you, you need me. We need to maintain this sense of community. The third is play, right? If you look at any mammal in all of our world, all mammals play, right? Dolphins play in the waves. Little chimpanzees throw apples at each other, right? It is critical that even if you have devoted your life to helping others, that you give yourself permission to do things that you want to do, not just that you have to do, and not feel selfish about that, not feel guilty about that. Because if you don't take care of that human need, right, to enjoy aspects of life, your brain is going to, quite frankly, shift into the state I'm talking about. Accountability matters. Finding what I call helper buddies, right? Saying to each other, we need to hold each other accountable to this. We need to check in with each other. How are we doing on these categories that she talked about? How can we create time that we are spending together, physically active, doing something we enjoy, or just sharing time together? Okay? Any questions about that so far, or thoughts about that? Okay. The other thing that becomes really, really important is knowing when to ask for help and when to seek professional help. And one thing I'd be happy to do, with Jess, is give you guys some ideas about that, because sometimes I know as a behavioral health provider, it is very challenging to access help, even if you have all the resources in the world, right? And then if you don't have all the resources in the world, it becomes even more challenging. So not being afraid to acknowledge when you need support, and then knowing what those resources are to access that support also becomes important. What we know about either direct trauma or secondary trauma is that it is not one of these things that time heals. Actually, it's usually the opposite. With time, these symptoms usually get worse, right? And so getting support early on, before things get too overwhelming, is when we know that we can be the most helpful. Okay? But getting the right type of support. The other thing we know that actually, again, from studying these brain scans, that helps the brain stay in a sustainable place is the power of ritual, right? Having a routine, having things that you do to acknowledge that all the ways that you help probably are not going to be enough, in the sense that we have so many problems in this world, right? And that's the part that often keeps people up at night. That's the part that often drives some of these symptoms, is I'm doing everything I can, right? I'm working so hard, and I know I'm scratching the surface. I know there is so much trauma out there. There is so much hardship, and I can't do it all. Can't do enough. That feeling of I'm not enough, right? And so whatever that ritual looks like to you, whether it's at the end of the day, if you're someone who is spiritual or religious, right, saying a prayer for all the people who are struggling that you aren't coming into direct contact with. If that's not your mindset, right, sending off a well wish, right, I wish all the people who are struggling well. That might sound so insignificant, so minute, right, but it's an acknowledgement that there's so much out there that is overwhelming that we can't touch, and we're aware of it, and we see it, and we are hoping, right, that everyone, whether we come into direct contact with them or not, can be well, right? And there's something incredibly powerful about having that daily acknowledgement that we know is also protective of the brain. So you may be sitting here thinking of other rituals or routines that you do, maybe even without calling them that you find helpful, but we know that identifying which of those rituals and routines helps you absolutely is protective for the brain. So, kind of the summary of all of that is that secondary trauma, right, or compassion fatigue or helper burnout is not some made up fluffy term, right? It's a real thing. We can see it on imaging, right? We know it has direct links to health and emotional health effects. And there are these very specific things we can do to buffer the brain from some of the most significant effects of this. The other thing I want to tell you guys is that a lot of this comes down to this concept of empathy, right? Empathy, by definition, is feeling with someone else, okay? In hearing your story, I am truly connecting with you enough that I hear what you're going through, right? I witness your life, I witness your story. Anyone who is a helper probably has an above average empathy response. You probably self-select into that because you care. Well, here's the cruel trick of nature, right? We also know from these brain scans that people who have stronger empathy responses also are most vulnerable to these brain changes that cause problems. So you self-select into something because you care, you can connect with other human beings, you're empathetic, and you're at more risk than other human beings for all these health effects we're talking about, right? So the answer to that is not to shut down and not care and not connect to people, right? The answer is to acknowledge that this is a real thing, that you are not weak for struggling, right? And for saying, I need to give the same care to myself that I give to other people in my world I care about, right? And to direct that empathy, to direct that caring nature to yourself as well, okay? So those are kind of the main themes. This is a huge topic, you guys. We've done like 4-day workshops on this, right? So this is like scratching the surface of something much bigger. My hope today is that if you're listening to this, you have a little bit of a vocabulary to frame some of maybe your own experiences or experiences you've seen in others. Maybe it gives you permission to kind of own what you're noticing in yourself or to check in with other people about it without any kind of judgment or shame or embarrassment. And to really think about your own narrative. How are you thinking about self-care? Is it some nice fluffy afterthought? Or are you defining it as absolutely critical to your own health and well-being and to your ability to care for others long term? So it's about getting the narrative right. It's about actually doing tangible things that protect your brain and protect your body as you care for others. And it's about the follow through and the sustainability. And that's where I think through community, you can keep each other accountable. Thoughts or questions on any of that? Yeah.
What are some signs that people can look out for? Because I think people kind of, especially within like the mutual aid realm, like you go like helping and go, and like sometimes people can't even like identify when they're at that burnout. So what are some like recommendations for people to be aware of that?
So she's asking about kind of how to look out for it. And I think I'm hearing you both in yourself and others, right? And I will tell you.
How can I look out for
yes.
it?
So people, and I will tell you that people in the helping community are notorious for ignoring the early signs because they're inconvenient. I don't want to admit that I need to stop and slow down and do something differently. That's not convenient. I want to keep going. So often those initial signs are subtle and we ignore them, right? Consciously or unconsciously. So I would say, I always tell people it's back to the biological basics. Sleep, appetite, and mood, right? And energy levels. So you may probably not noticing other people's sleep patterns, but you may notice that in yourself. That's one of the first things to go. Either you're waking up multiple times in the night, whether with nightmares or without. Maybe you're just lying awake at night. Finally, you can lay down and sleep, but your brain's not having it. It's going, I call it the hamster wheel of thought, right? You can't turn it off. Often in other people, what we notice are kind of those subtle mood shifts. Something that maybe would annoy them a little bit now is causing a big irritable reaction, right? Often it's also, I call it like the glaze, right? So I'm talking to you and you're listening, you're not doing anything else, but I can tell you're somewhere else, right? And you can maybe tell you're somewhere else too. It's that moment of like, I didn't hear a word you just said to me. Uh-oh, right? So it's kind of like that almost dissociation, but in a very mild sense. Like I'm distracted, I'm thinking about other things, right? And you can pick that up in the people that you know. You can see that look, right? People stop taking care of themselves, right? Hey, you need to go take a break, get some water, go eat something. Nope, I gotta go, right? And now people are going way too long without those basics. So that basic self-care starts to become an afterthought. Those are I would say, some of the most obvious things that you can see probably in yourself and in others. And I would also say creating a culture amongst helpers of sort of giving permission to point that out to each other, right? That if I say to you, hey, are you okay? You know, you've seemed a little bit distracted, for you not to take that as some attack, right? Or me criticizing you, but to create a culture amongst each other where that's considered helpful, right? Where giving that type of feedback to each other is coming from a place of love and care and that it's received that way and given that way, I think is critical as a community to creating a safe space to notice and point out those signs. Does that help?
No, definitely. Thank you.
What other questions or thoughts do you all have?
What are so kind of like if you like, let's say like we're in this space, someone is like kind of like reaching out to you like, hey, I'm at this like moment of burnout, like what do you recommend for people to like kind of like help each other out, like in like as you said, like in that respectful way?
Yeah.
So like what are those resources that you recommend to people?
So I would say the first thing is this idea of creating space, right? That if you are coming to me and saying I'm struggling, I don't want to jump immediately to fix it mode. Do this, this, and this, right? Because that's probably not what you need. Probably the first thing you need is to feel heard and connected with and acknowledged, right? So I think the first thing, if somebody comes to you acknowledging that, is to create that space and say, thank you for telling me, right? I'm so glad that you shared that with me. Tell me more about that, right? So to create that space for somebody to just get that out of their head and into the space in front of them. I think then asking them, what do you need? They may not know, but they may say, actually, what I need is to just go take a walk and talk to you for a second, right? Or what I need is to actually just have a moment, right? To get some water. Can you get me some water? Right? So asking people to help you if there is something specific that they know they need, give them permission to ask for it. If they don't, giving some potential suggestions. Would it be helpful if we just take a walk and you talk with me? Is there something tangible I can do for you, right? Can I help you with a meal? Can I help, so going through some of the ways that, can I help you access resources? I may not know them, but I can ask someone who might, right? So I think giving people the space, giving people permission to ask for what they need, even if they don't know, to kind of think about it, and then offering some of those concrete and less concrete ways that you can offer assistance is probably the most helpful. And if you're asking for help, thinking about what do I need from people, and if what you need is just to be heard, to say, I'm not looking for a solution, I'm not looking for an answer, I'm just looking for an ear, right? Would you be that for me? So to be able to kind of help people know how to help you is also really important. You guys are helpers. You're going to want to fix it, right? You're going to want to fix this for people. So let them know if that's not what you need. I just want space to talk.
Kind of just one more follow-up. Especially just kind of like within the mutual realm, a lot of us are like working class and kind of like having like accessible resources. Like, do you kind of know like accessible, like even like free resources for people to kind of like guide in that
and
route?
I am happy to put together a list for guests. So I do.
Awesome.
Where I work right now, we work with people from all different walks of life and kind of socioeconomic levels. And so I have several resources, that are free or, reasonably affordable, and I'm happy to put together a list and provide that to you guys.
Awesome.
And then, I'm a helper too, right? I want to be helpful. So if you look at that and are like, I was looking for this thing, I don't see it on there, ask me, because I have a lot of friends too who may know of a resource I don't. And so I'm happy to help track down stuff if you guys are looking for something specific and don't see it there.
No, that's great.
Yeah. Okay.
In that list, could you include maybe queer, trans,
Yes.
color?
Absolutely.
Specify those
Yes,
things?
100%. Absolutely. Yeah. Yep. Okay. So that's my overview. If you guys think of follow-up questions or there is anything else that I can be helpful with or track down for you all, she knows how to reach me. So definitely let me know. But, I have so much respect for everybody here. And, I think the goal is to create sustainable helpers, right? And that doesn't mean quick fixes often. That means looking in the mirror and really thinking about, what do I need to change to be able to think about this differently, take care of myself differently, to be able to be there long term. So it's a process, right? It's not a checklist. It's a process. Yeah.
I guess something just kind of came to mind when you were speaking. One thing that I think I often struggled with was the definition of self-care and how I defined it for myself.
Yeah.
And I felt like after a while I started stressing myself out with my self-care, and I'm like, what in the world, I'm like, I'm not doing this perfectly, or I'm not doing enough, or I'm not, and so it's kind of doing this perfectionism thing onto my self-care. And what I've really learned, I think, and learning still is even just making parts of my part of my day, but just being very present for those, and saying like, thank you, I do love this part of my day. Like, this feels good, it's nourishing. Yeah, you know, like I love like I make like nice little coffees for myself in the morning, you know, and those are very intentional. In my day with like a tea I really like, and I try and do that every day. And it's like I was gonna do that anyways, but now if I feel like if I center it a little differently, if I take 15 minutes and read a book while doing those things, it had a whole different effect on my day.
So we actually call that linking, which is linking self-care to already what's happening in your day. And we find that people are much more sustainable when they do that. And I was smiling under my mask when you said that, because I do the same thing, right? Like, I'm stressing myself out about self-care, you know, and at this point it's all undermined. So you're right. I think if it feels like one more to do, or it feels like I've got to check these boxes, it may work for a week. It's like the New Year's Eve phenomenon. Okay, I've got my resolutions this year. I'm going to plow through them, and by February 1st, they're out the window, right? If you say what you're saying, which is, how can I do my day with a little bit more of the spirit of self-care? How can I be a little more present, not by adding another connection, but by connecting with the connections already in my day? How do I drink that water or drink that tea, but with a little more presence, right? You're probably going to be better off than if you're trying to add 10 more things. So I think it's a very, very good point. And I think it's all about sustainability and how you build it into your day in a way that you can continue.
Well,
so I think it's a great point.
Sustainability, but also, like, you know, I just feel like it's also something that I see people often spending a lot of money on. You know, crystal, which, I mean, you know, have fun.
Sure.
But, like, if you're doing, you know, sometimes you get with essential oils and crystals and tea bags and, you know, whatever else, journals, all this stuff, it's like you can spend a lot of money doing it and not be any happier.
Exactly. And I think often that backfires, like, I spent all this money or I spent all this time and I'm not any happier, so now I'm mad about that, right? And so we can sort of create more of a problem when we feel like we're investing all this time or resources and we're not ending up anywhere happier, right? And I think the other point with that is sort of it has to be values driven, right? What is self-care for me is going to be different than any of you, right? Because my kind of what drives me and fulfills me may be slightly different. So it's not about like reading the best book on self-care and doing what this person says. It's about saying what sustains me, right? What would be meaningful to add into my day that feels like it's a values-driven choice. And I think when you take a values-driven approach, it's more personalized and it's more sustainable and meaningful as well.
Totally.
Okay. Well, thank you guys so much for hosting me, and I'm here. If other questions come up or whatever, let me know. Okay.
Thank you so much.